If you have ever lived like this, believing that if someone loved you hard enough, your life would finally become steady, then do not be too quick to call that love. You think that if someone chooses you completely, needs you deeply, places you at the center of their world, that strange hunger inside you will finally be filled. But very often, that is not what happens. Some kinds of love arrive sweet, intense, addictive. Someone looks at you as if you are the answer. The messages keep coming. The attention keeps coming. The warmth keeps coming. At first, it feels like happiness. But after a while, your chest begins to tighten. You start wanting distance. You start wanting air. You start feeling that even saying, "I love you too," sounds a little like repaying a debt. If that feeling is familiar, do not rush to call yourself cold. A lot of people do not fail at love because they cannot love. A lot of people have simply mistaken being loved for happiness itself, or understood this for the first time in a city called Lanternwind. It was a city by the southern Amber Sea, a place where the wind never really stopped. On clear days, the harbor shone like polished metal. Salt, sunlight, and the scent of distant flowers moved through the air together. People arrived in Lanternwind, believing their lives would finally become easier there. The city was beautiful in a dangerous way, beautiful enough to make people assume that if someone fell in love with them there, many things inside them would quietly heal. Orin was 31 then. He had a house of his own, steady work, and enough structure around him that he no longer looked empty from the outside. But inside, he carried a hollow place he did not know how to fill. It was not merely loneliness. It was more like hunger, a private hunger that kept whispering that if someone loved him enough, wanted him enough, placed him first strongly enough, he would finally become whole. And because of that hunger, when Celine entered his life, he barely resisted. Celine loved quickly and fully. She looked at him as if she had finally found what she had been searching for. She remembered his habits. She noticed his moods. She asked if he had slept. She told him she had been thinking about him all day. She made room for him everywhere. And at first, it felt exactly like the thing he had always wanted. Someone remembered him. Someone cared. Someone held him close in their mind. Someone made him feel that he was not optional. But slowly, something changed. Celine did not become cruel. She was still warm, still devoted, still willing to pour almost all of herself into what she felt for him. The problem was not that she loved too little. The problem was that her love began to feel like a contract with invisible clauses. The more she gave, the heavier he felt. The more she centered him, the less room he had to be tired. The more intensely she loved, the more he felt that he had to become someone worthy of carrying that intensity. He could not be too distant, could not be too late, could not have a day when he wanted silence, could not suddenly need space, could not reveal that he too sometimes grew tired of carrying someone else's emotional weather. It was a strange feeling. He was being loved, and yet slowly it began to feel as if he were being held inside something that tightened. One night, Celine fell asleep against his chest. The curtains moved softly in the wind. The room was quiet. It should have been a tender scene. But Orin lay there, with one terrifying thought rising inside him. I think I can no longer breathe. The thought frightened him because he had gotten what he believed he always wanted. He was needed. He was chosen. He was loved deeply. Why did it feel less like freedom and more like suffocation? A few days later, he left the city center and went to the cliffs to see an old man. The man's name was Aram. Some said he had once advised rulers on matters of the heart. Others said he had once lost someone so important that afterward he moved to the edge of the sea and spent his days with wind, waves, and the sound of distant birds. Whatever the truth was, he understood human hearts with a kind of patience that made people uneasy. When Oren arrived, Aram was repairing an old wind chime. Thin metal pieces hung from a small wooden frame. When the air moved through them, they made a sound so light it was almost vanishing. Oren did not circle around the truth. He said directly, "I always thought being loved deeply would make a person happy. Why does it make me feel like I cannot breathe?" Aram did not answer at once. He hung the chime back up, waited for a gust of wind to pass through it. Then he said, "Because being loved and loving are not the same thing." Oren frowned. Aram looked toward the sea. Being loved is intense, but it is a complicated intensity. At first it tastes sweet. Then the sweetness becomes too heavy. When someone places their entire emotional world on top of you, love can change shape. Warmth becomes weight. He let the wind move again through the chime. "Being loved often creates invisible debt," he said. "The more the other person gives, the more you begin to feel that you owe. You owe attention. You owe consistency. You owe the maintenance of the image their love has made of you. That is not always the purest form of love. Sometimes it is simply a very sweet form of bondage." Oren went still, because that was exactly what he had been unable to name. He was not untouched by Selene's love. He was moved by it. But inside that tenderness, there was also pressure, responsibility, guilt, and the slow loss of his own shape. Aram turned and asked him, "Have you ever really tried to love something? Not to be loved, not to be wanted, not to be centered, to love." Oren did not know how to answer. So Aram made it simpler, not as a transaction, he said, not as a bargain, not as a strategy for getting something back. "Have you ever allowed yourself to feel joy simply because something exists? A person, the wind, a tree, an evening light, the sea, a voice, a life you cannot possess and do not need to own." That question moved something in him, because he realized that most of his life in love had not been about loving. It had been about waiting to be filled, waiting for someone to prove his worth, waiting for someone to hold him high enough that his own emptiness would disappear. His heart had become like a dry well, waiting for someone else to pour water into it. And because of that, he had become fragile. If the attention moved, he panicked. If the warmth dimmed, he panicked. If the love shifted, he began to fall. Aram seemed to see all of this at once. A person who is always waiting to be loved can become a beggar in the emotional world, he said. But a person who learns how to love outwardly becomes very strong, because loving is not the same as needing. Loving is expensive, not because it costs money, because it asks you to open, to stop bargaining, to stop measuring, to stop asking, "What am I getting in return?" And because of that, loving is freer than being loved. Then Aram told him a story. A man once loved a bird. The bird was beautiful in flight. Its feathers flashed in the light. The man loved it so much that he built it a magnificent cage. He told himself that now the bird would always be his. At first he felt relieved. Then something changed. The bird stopped singing. Its eyes lost their brightness. And only then did the man understand that what he had loved was never the bird inside the cage. He had loved the bird in flight. But because he wanted to secure it, he had destroyed the very thing he loved. Aram looked at Oren. Many people think love means holding on more tightly, but that is often possession, not love. Real love is not turning another person into your oxygen. Real love is having breath of your own and still feeling joy that another life exists. After that conversation, Oren began practicing something entirely different. Not how to make others love him more, how to love. He began very small. In the morning, When the wind came in from the sea, he let himself truly feel it, not as background, as something whose existence made the world more beautiful. At the market, he watched an old man trimming flowers with patient hands. In a narrow lane, he watched a cat sleeping in the sun. At dusk, he stopped for the sky instead of rushing through it. He also changed something in the way he turned toward people. Less calculation, less silent bargaining, less testing to see whether they cared enough. Instead, he tried allowing tenderness to rise simply because another person existed in front of him, not because they could save him, not because they could fill him, just because they were there. It was strange at first, then, slowly, something changed. He was no longer so thirsty. Before, every kind word had felt like water. Every bit of attention had felt like rescue. Now it was different. He still loved being loved, but the love of others was no longer his oxygen tank. If it came, it was beautiful. If it did not, he did not immediately suffocate. It was as if something inside him had become a spring instead of an empty bowl. He finally understood that what makes a person strong is not being loved by many. It is learning how to let love flow outward from within, even when no one is applauding, even when no one is returning it on cue. Later, when Celine came back to him, he was able to say something he could not have said before. "I am grateful that you love me," he told her, "but I cannot live as the container for all your expectations. That is not love. That is where I disappear." This time, he did not collapse into guilt, because by then he already knew that he did not need another person's intensity to prove his existence. Years later, someone asked him what the most important awakening in love had been. He thought for a long time. Then he said, "It was not finally finding someone who could fill me. It was the day I stopped begging to be loved and learned how to let love become something I could offer to the world myself." This is Otherworld Radio. Real happiness does not begin when someone arrives and loves you hard enough. It begins when your life is no longer chained to someone else's response. When you learn how to love a person, the wind, the light, the sea, and even those beautiful things you can never possess, the city inside you that has been shaking for years begins slowly to stand.